Thank you all for joining me today at this webinar about diabetes and what you need to know. My name is Pamela Durant, and I am the founder and managing director of DiaPoint ME. This is a company based here in Dubai. My son is a student at ASD as well. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about diabetes today. So I really thank you all so much for joining. My son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2009 when he was just 20 months old. He was really small, and it was a huge shock. I'm a passionate diabetes advocate because I worked in healthcare for all my life, all my adult life, I should say, even before my son was diagnosed. And I worked in strategy, I worked in quality management, I worked to help endocrinologists set up clinics. And when my son was diagnosed with diabetes, I still really, in hindsight, I realized that I really didn't know what that meant until I was actually living it. I think that happens with a lot of things until, we don't know what we don't know until we have to know what we need to know. And so in 2016, I left what some people might call a successful corporate career to start a company to support people touched by diabetes. And that is for people with diabetes, for parents of children with diabetes, or for people with spouses that have diabetes, for anybody touched by diabetes. I'm also a certified wellness coach and also certified in lifestyle medicine. So this gives me some additional special insight into, different diet, how we're eating and how that affects our health. So this last Saturday, November 14th, was World Diabetes Day. And in the pre-COVID years, we would, be hearing more about it in the media. There were all the walks and events and different things to create awareness and, beat diabetes and things like this. And the walks and the social things, they're really great. But for people with diabetes, we're doing this 365 days a year, 24/7. It's nonstop. I love the walks. They're really a great way to bring the community together. But after the walks, there's a lot more to be discussed. And the reason that this day falls on November 14th is because this is the day that Sir Frederick Banting, who won a Nobel Prize for the invention of insulin, he and his research partner, Charles Best, discovered insulin just about 100 years ago. And that is the substance, that is the reason why my son is alive today. If it was not for him and insulin, my son and many other people like him would not be here. So these are just some statistics. I am not here to talk to you about statistics and how many millions of people have diabetes. 463 million people do have it. These are from the IDF, the International Diabetes Federation. And this is what you typically read about in all the newspapers and see in the media when people talk about diabetes. And the numbers, they're huge, they're staggering. They should make us really stop in our tracks and think about what diabetes is. But they're just numbers at the end of the day, and they're just statistics. Until they impact us personally, they really don't mean much. They're just statistics. By 2045, in just about 25 years or less, they anticipate that 700 million people will have diabetes in the world. Now, this was pre-COVID projections. I project that this number will actually be even higher because with COVID, we've developed, I don't want to say bad habits, but we've had to go into lockdown. Other countries are going back into lockdown. We're not able to get outdoors and exercise as much in the same way as we used to. We're not able to walk around as much as we used to. And then the adoption of more binge watching and other things like this. And people, talk about the weight they gained in lockdown and different things like this. So while diabetes is not exclusively tied to weight, I do anticipate that this number might increase. Diabetes in the region, over 38.7 million people in Middle East and North Africa have diabetes. That's about 1 in 10 adults, and that number is also going to increase. If you see the little graph I made here, it's very similar kind of throughout. Saudi Arabia has the highest rate, and one reason that is because they have the highest population. When you read about diabetes statistics, and there is kind of the myth that people say, oh, you work in the diabetes space, you must have so much work to do because there's such a high prevalence of diabetes here. Everybody has diabetes. While there are a lot of people that have diabetes, when you read about the countries who have the most, it's usually the United States, China, sometimes India is also in the top 5 or so. And a lot of that has to do with they have the largest population. Now, the point of that is that diabetes is everywhere all over the world. While sometimes studies show that there are some races that are more prevalent to certain types of diabetes than others, and nobody knows exactly why that is, but we can be sure that in our lifetime, we will be touched by diabetes. We will either know somebody that has it, or we may actually have diabetes ourselves. So what does diabetes look like? So I want you to take a minute and think about what it looks like to you. Maybe you know somebody that has diabetes. Maybe you've read, maybe you have diabetes, but what does it look like to you? And just kind of get that picture in your head. Sometimes there might be similarities, there might not be. A lot of people tell me that for them, this is one of the images that comes up when they think of diabetes. They think of fast food, overeating, maybe being overweight, eating too many sweets. But how many of you actually thought of this? Every single person on this page has diabetes of some kind, or had. Arthur Ashe, a famous tennis player, he's no longer alive, but he didn't die from diabetes, I don't believe. And Evita Leader, she's an Olympic swimmer. She's from South America. She participated in the Summer Games in Brazil a few years ago. She has type 1 diabetes. There was also another Olympic swimmer that year from the US with type 1 diabetes, but I like to highlight Evita because I think she's one of the lesser known type 1 swimmers. And coming from a small country where she doesn't have as many resources, and the fact that she went to the Olympics, I think is pretty amazing. Holly Berry has diabetes, although she doesn't highlight which type it is, and sometimes the media gets it. They say type 2, they say type 1. It could be MODY, which is a genetic form of diabetes, but she's openly quoted and talks about her diabetes, although we don't know exactly what type all the time. Sebastian Cesville was the first person with diabetes to climb Mount Everest. Selma Hayek had gestational diabetes, which happens, and some of you may have experienced it. If there's women here that have been pregnant, gestational diabetes can happen when you're pregnant. That's why they make you take a glucose test to check your glucose tolerance. And she's, spoken and shared some of her experiences as she's been pregnant with diabetes. Sage Donnelly is another champion athlete. She's a kayaker, professional, type 1. And Team Novo, they're sponsored by Novo Nordisk, which is a company that makes insulin, but they have a bicycling team. They've, participated here in the UAE tour and also the Dubai and Abu Dhabi tour before it was joined together. Every single cyclist in that team has diabetes. They're all from different countries, and many of them have competed in the Olympics representing their own country. They all have diabetes. So what exactly is diabetes? In people with diabetes, there's not enough hormone called insulin in the body. And I think we're all pretty aware of that because we always hear about insulin. What is it? What does it do? Insulin is the thing that turns our food into energy. And instead of being turned into energy, what happens is if we don't have enough insulin, or if our body doesn't make insulin, that sugar will just stay in our bloodstream. And that is not good. That makes our blood very acidic, and that gives us high blood sugar. So how does it work exactly? When we eat something that has a carbohydrate in it, piece of fruit, piece of bread, grains, not protein. Protein doesn't have a carbohydrate. Protein fuels our body in other ways. But when we eat something that has a carbohydrate, then it's digested and our stomach and intestines break it down. So it's absorbed into the bloodstream. Then once the glucose or the sugar or carbohydrate from the food that we ate is in our blood, then that has to move into our cells to give us energy. and usually it goes to our muscles. However, we have to have insulin in order to open the cells to receive the energy. So the insulin, if you think of it like a door, the insulin are the keys to open the doors to our cells to accept the glucose that we need to make energy. In people with diabetes, there's something wrong with the key, or sometimes there might be something wrong with the door, but mostly we can say it's the key. And the door will stay locked until that key can open it. The insulin opens the door, the sugar goes into the cells, and then we use it as fuel. But if the key, sometimes the key might fit and open the door, and it might just open the door a little bit. So only some of the glucose can get into the cell. Think type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, where we still produce some insulin, but our blood sugar is high. In the case of someone with type 1 diabetes, like my son, he produces no insulin. So that key just doesn't even work in his doors. All of his doors are closed. And without taking insulin on a regular basis before every meal and throughout the day, that glucose will stay and build and build and grow and just stay in his body. And that is quite dangerous and even deadly. So I mentioned 3 different types of diabetes, and there's more, but these are the main ones. Type 1, where the body doesn't produce any insulin. This is commonly associated with children. However, adults can get diagnosed with type 1 as well. And the reason for that is nobody knows what sets it off, but the reason is that the immune system is attacking the pancreas. It's attacking the cells in the pancreas that are making the keys, and then your body can't make any insulin. They're insulin dependent for life. Nobody can grow out of it, and nobody knows why it happens. There's a lot of studies, but still it's kind of inconclusive. Type 2, the body makes some insulin. Cells don't use it as well as they should. And you might control it with diet and exercise, but not always. It does help. Diet and exercise helps all types of diabetes. And type 2 is most commonly associated with better diet and exercising more. Gestational, as I mentioned, can happen during pregnancy, and it's due to the buildup of sugar that the body can't convert to energy. Again, scientists are studying really what triggers this in some women and not others, and it's not really clear why. And some women that have had multiple pregnancies, for example, with the first pregnancy, they didn't have any gestational diabetes, and then second pregnancy they had. So just because you were pregnant once and didn't have it doesn't mean it'll happen again. Or if you do have it with one pregnancy and you're pregnant again, you may or may not get it. You have a higher chance of having it again, but not necessarily. And this absolutely has to be treated by a medical doctor. Your doctor's orders have to be followed because it can really do harm to a mother, and also it can harm the baby. So what are the signs of diabetes? How do you know if you might have it? If you're going to get checkups on a regular basis and they're checking your blood, that's part of a kind of standard checkup, then they might pick it up there. Your doctor might pick it up. But if you're feeling thirsty all the time, and I mean like unquenchable thirst, frequent trips to the toilet because you're always thirsty and you're always having to go to the toilet. And the reason for that is because you have so much sugar in your blood that your body is trying to flush that out. So you're going to feel thirsty and you're going to pee a lot. In children, bedwetting is a sign. Children who previously did not wet the bed might be having some challenges. It could be other things, but it's always good to rule out type 1 diabetes, particularly if they've been drinking a lot and they've been wetting the bed. In the case of my son, he was 20 months old. And actually it was my helper who said, I think he's drinking too much water. I said, let's measure it. And with everything else he was drinking, he, by 5 o'clock, had 1.5 liters of water. But the real thing that was highlighting to me, and it was August in Dubai, I was thinking it was just too hot. But the real issue was he had started to learn to toilet train, and he was going backwards in that. We still kept the diaper or nappy on him. They were full, just completely full. And at night he was drenched, and he had never done that before. Also, people that have high blood sugar might feel hungry. Again, this is your body. Your body's messages are getting confused. Your body knows it needs something, but it's not sure what. High blood sugar can cause weight loss. So people often, before they're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes particularly, they'll lose a lot of weight and look really thin. Feeling angry or having other mood changes, if they're tired and weak, blurred vision, high blood sugar over time, particularly in type 1, can also cause nausea and vomiting. So it's really important that you check, particularly a child that might be showing these symptoms, that you take them to the doctor and have the doctor check them. And if, as an adult, if you're having these symptoms, you definitely want to ask your doctor, make an appointment and get a checkup. It's very easy to rule out or to confirm. So I thought we'd make this a little bit interactive. And by the way, feel free, I didn't mention at the beginning of the call, please feel free, if you have any questions at any time, just put them in the Q&A, and then I'll come back to them if I don't answer them throughout. But I thought it might be interesting to do a little bit of true or false. Feel free to write your answers down, or if you want to share what you think in the Q&A, that's okay too. So true or false? People with diabetes can't eat sugar. I'm just going to go through all the questions and then I'll share the answers at the end. Type 2 diabetes only affects people who are overweight. Type 2 diabetes only happens to people who are old. People with diabetes should only eat low-carb diets. People with diabetes will go blind or lose a leg. People with diabetes are dangerous drivers. Diabetes can be cured. Diabetes is genetic, so if no one in my family has it, I won't get it. I only have pre-diabetes, so I shouldn't worry about that. If a doctor prescribes insulin, that means a person with diabetes is doing a bad job of managing it. It is not safe to do strenuous sports or activities with diabetes. Adults can get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Herbal treatments or alternative medicine is the best cure for diabetes. Doctors do not understand diabetes. My blood sugar is under control, so I can stop taking medication. Diabetes is contagious. Diabetes can be prevented. So I'm sure you went through some of those in your mind, and I'll tell you a lot of them are false. They're mostly myths, which I'm here to bust a few myths, and I'll tell you why most of them are false. But people with diabetes can eat sugar. This is true. You can eat sugar. You shouldn't eat it like all the time. None of us. My son is going to say, years later when he's an adult, he's going to say, my mom used to always say, diabetes or not, nobody needs to be eating donuts every day, which I say. And I am a true advocate and supporter of eating well, eating healthy, and eating good foods. What we don't want to do, if we have diabetes, of course we have to pay attention to what we're eating, because the amount of carbohydrates that we eat can affect our blood sugars adversely. And if we're taking medication, we need to know. In the case of type 1 diabetes, yes, you will get better results if you don't eat sweets, but you need to know the carbohydrates that are in it so that you know the right amount of insulin to give. There's a popular meme for type 1. It says, children with type 1 diabetes can eat everything but cookies laced with poison. And that's kind of true. So it was really tricky around school parties, because people thought that my son couldn't eat anything at the school party because he had type 1 diabetes, but that's absolutely not true. Whoops, sorry about that. Type 2 diabetes affects people who are overweight, or only affects people who are overweight. That is false. People of all shapes and sizes can get type 2 diabetes. We don't always know why it happens. Now, yes, there is scientific evidence that if we are unhealthy and if we're overweight or obese, then we do have a higher risk for type 2 diabetes, but no one is 100% safe, because even people who are not overweight, I have a friend who's a marathon runner and he has type 2 diabetes. For whatever genetic reason, his pancreas does not make enough insulin, and his pancreas needs a little bit of help. Type 2 diabetes happens only to people who are old. That is false. As I mentioned, my friend that runs the marathons, he was diagnosed when he was in his 30s. That's not that old. People with diabetes should only eat low-carb diets. This is false. Yes, some low-carb diets can help, but you also need to be careful because some can be harmful. Some have been scientifically proven not to be the healthiest thing that's out there. So it's best that if you do have diabetes, you speak with a dietitian who understands diabetes or a diabetes educator. For children, low-carb diets are not really great. Now, I know keto diets have, been used a lot on children. I think it was with autism is where they initially discovered that this was a good idea. That's a completely different subject. But in general, children need carbohydrates because it fosters brain development. If we put our children on a low carb diet, then that's not really going to fuel their growth. They do need to be eating healthy carbs, but no carbs is really difficult. People with diabetes will go blind or lose a leg. That's false. And I highlight this because always in the media, when there's pictures of diabetes, it always talks about the complications and the horrible things that happen with diabetes. And yes, for sure, if you don't pay attention to your diabetes and you do not manage it, these things can happen. But I think the previous slide that I showed with the pictures of athletes and other people that are managing and living a full life with it, there's no reason for these things to have to happen. People with diabetes are dangerous drivers. This comes up in the media from time to time because people think that people with diabetes should not drive cars because they can have a low blood sugar and that might affect their driving. People with diabetes, particularly type 1, they should always check their blood sugar before they drive a car. And they should always have some fast acting sugar, glucose of their choice nearby that they can access in case they ever are driving and they feel their blood sugar is going low. Diabetes can be cured. Now, this is a little provocative because you'll see in the media and social media and all these things that you always say, oh, cure your diabetes. If diabetes could be cured, I would not be sitting here having this discussion with you, nor would there be hundreds of millions of people in the world with diabetes. With type 2, you might manage it more or manage it better with food and exercise, but not in all cases. And let's say with type 2, you did manage it to where you didn't have to take any insulin or need any extra support. But if you went back and you changed your lifestyle to go the opposite way and maybe started exercising less and maybe eating less healthy foods, you may find yourself having to manage diabetes again. So there is truly no cure. Diabetes is genetic. No one in my family has it, so it won't happen to me. That is false. Many people get diabetes. If you do have it in your family, you do have a higher chance of having it, but that's not a guarantee that you will get it. And also not having a family history of it doesn't mean you won't get it either. We don't have a family history of type 1 diabetes, and my son has it. Unless something happened over 100 years ago before insulin was invented and there's some random gene out there, but we don't know that. I only have pre-diabetes, so I should not worry. This is false. Pre-diabetes is when your doctor tells you that your blood sugar is slightly elevated or you're showing insulin resistance. It's not considered a full diabetes diagnosis, but your blood sugar is a little bit higher than normal. And normal, I say normal blood sugar is targeted in North American terms, the way we measure it, around 100. So you might get a slightly elevated reading, maybe a 120 or something like this as a fasting glucose. And your doctor might say to you, you should walk more, exercise, or how's your eating, change your eating habits. And maybe you're doing all of those. So maybe there's something else that can be done. You should ask your doctor. But you'll feel okay. You don't feel bad. So you think, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. It's fine. But you should pay attention to it, because most likely if you ignore it, your blood sugar is going to go higher, and that in result will do more damage to your organs in your body. So you do want to take care of it and manage it. If a doctor prescribes insulin, that means you're doing a bad job. Absolutely false. Sometimes we need insulin. Sometimes our body will not make it no matter what we do. In the case of my son, he absolutely needs insulin. But there's a lot of people with type 2 diabetes, they need to take insulin. It's not safe to do exercise or sports with diabetes. On the contrary, it helps your diabetes. Now, you don't want to be doing sports if your blood sugar is like reading at 300. In the case of my son, which on rare occasion, he'll have a high reading. If your blood sugar is that high, you want to wait until it comes down. And the reason for that is because high blood sugar puts a lot of stress on the body. And if it's been high over time, that's just your heart working more and everything else. And that can be a little bit dangerous. So you don't want to do that. But for most of us, especially type 2 diabetes, and I should mention that type 2 diabetes makes up 98 to 99% of all people with diabetes. Type 1 is only 1% of the population. So it's absolutely safe and encouraged to do sports if you have diabetes. A child will grow out of his or her diabetes. Absolutely false. I get asked this question a lot, and how I wish my child would grow out of this, but it's not going to happen unless there's a proper cure. He will live with this the rest of his life. Adults can get diagnosed with type 1. This is absolutely true. I didn't know this until after my son's diagnosis, and I was at a conference and I met a man and his father who had type 1 diabetes, and they were both diagnosed as adults in their 30s and their 50s. And sometimes what happens when you're diagnosed with type 1 as an adult, it's a misdiagnosis, because even doctors always assume, oh, you're an adult, it's type 2. Because type 1 was always called juvenile diabetes, but it's not. Type 1 can occur in adults. But again, this is only 1% of all people with diabetes. But if you find that you or someone you love is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and they're not having good results with traditional treatment that the doctors prescribed, you may want to check for the antibodies that are in the system of people with type 1 diabetes, because those antibodies show that there is some kind of immune system attack happening, and that's how we confirm that type 1 diabetes is in a person or not. Herbal treatments or alternative medicine are the best cure for diabetes. Now, before I confirm the false, I want to say I love alternative or complementary medicine. I do believe in it. I love acupuncture, all the things. I think they are fantastic. However, they are not a cure for diabetes. They can help. And there's a lot of information out there saying, eat this, drink that. And some people do see, some herbs and things supporting their blood sugar, or they get better results if they eat something, a herb, before they have a meal. And that's great if that works for you, but that also may not work for everyone else. You also don't want to drop what your doctor has prescribed to you and then 100% focus on an herbal treatment or some other alternative medicine cure. It's best that you ask your doctor before you make any changes. Now, I've had someone tell me that my son's type 1 diabetes could be cured with meditation, and he was insisting. Transcendental meditation, to be exact. If I put my son on a diet of meditation and healthy food, and I took him off insulin, he would probably die in 3-4 days, maybe a week. He might survive a week. So we have to be really careful with how we talk about alternative medicine and treatments for diabetes. I think that they all have their place, but they're not always the best cure or the absolute cure. And always see a qualified doctor who understands diabetes. That's absolutely true. And the key word here is qualified doctor. Not all doctors have experience with diabetes. The best doctor to see is an endocrinologist, because the pancreas is part of the endocrine system, and these doctors have studied diabetes in detail. If you find yourself with a child that has type 1 diabetes, you need to look for a pediatric endocrinologist. Endocrinologists that see adults, sometimes they don't understand type 1, because type 2 and type 1 can be managed very differently. They're not quite the same, even though they both involve insulin and the pancreas and everything, but they're very, very different. If you ever find yourself wondering where to look for an endocrinologist, feel free to reach out and I can suggest a few. My blood sugar is under control, so I can stop taking medication. That's false. Diabetes is a chronic condition, meaning that we have to manage it over a long period of time for life. It's not what we call an acute medical condition. Acute, meaning you broke your arm. You have an infection and you took antibiotics, and then after that's done, then it's finished. Diabetes is not like that. Why did your blood sugar get under control? It's because you were taking medication. It's not that the medication cured you, but it helped you get it under control. The same that if you have, challenges with blood pressure and you need to take medication for that, you also need to keep taking your medication for diabetes. Diabetes is contagious. That's very false. I think we all know that, but sometimes in small children, they can think that it's contagious. If one of their friends comes down with diabetes diagnosis suddenly, then they think, they might get it too. Diabetes can be prevented. Sometimes it can. And a lot of the media messages are, prevent diabetes. But because I meet so many people of so many shapes and sizes and different walks of life, and they still end up with diabetes, even though they're living a very healthy lifestyle, sometimes it might not be prevented. Regardless, we should all be living a life as healthy as possible. Then we will decrease our chances of getting diabetes, but we may not always be able to prevent it. So please know that if you do get a diabetes diagnosis, it's not your fault. It may not have been able to be prevented. And people with diabetes can do everything a person without diabetes can. That is true. And I've seen every sport, every activity that someone with diabetes is doing. I think the one that freaks me out the most is scuba diving. I've seen some type 1 scuba divers, and that just scares me, because checking your blood sugar underwater and taking insulin and doing all those things would be quite challenging. But what I have learned also, people with diabetes are determined and they do not let it stop them from doing the things that they want to do. So life with diabetes, what's it like should you get a diabetes diagnosis? So these are my son's hands. He was probably 5 or 6 years old, checking his own blood sugar, I think one night while doing his homework or something. And yes, this is what diabetes is like. He doesn't have to check his fingers so much anymore. He now uses a continuous glucose monitor, and he uses that with an insulin pump. Here you can see the insulin pump on him. The insulin pump doesn't make all the decisions and do everything for him at all. You still have to do a lot and manage it. This picture was about 1 or 2 days after he had just got his insulin pump. And it's good that I use a full format camera, because when I took this picture, I cried, because then that I really realized like what this really meant for him at that moment. But he's fine. Like I said, he was diagnosed at 20 months old. He was so small, and I didn't think it was, how could that even be possible? I told you I had a suspicion because he was drinking too much water. And thankfully, I knew that was a sign. And the only reason I did was because I had a dog growing up that was drinking too much water, and they kept testing him for diabetes. The dog had an adrenal gland condition, but it was the life lesson that I needed to take my son to the doctor sooner rather than later. And even my son's pediatrician did not think that it was possible. The reason I share this picture and this story with you, I rarely use pictures of my son in any advocacy that I do, but here you wouldn't recognize him if you saw him now, because people often just don't think diabetes is possible. Even the best doctors can overlook it. The doctor said to me, "You're healthy, your husband's healthy, he's healthy. There's no way he has diabetes, but if it will give you peace of mind, we'll check his blood sugar." I said, "Yes, please." And he checked, and the blood sugar read 640. I think it was 640. It could have been 460, because I'm not sure meters read that high. The doctor didn't believe the glucose meter. He asked his nurse to please bring him a second meter, and he got about the same number. And then there we were, diagnosed with diabetes. So doctors can miss it. In children who are constantly urinating and bedwetting, and sometimes children will get a rash, small children, like a diaper rash. And a lot of doctors will say, oh, it's a urinary tract infection. Later, when their blood sugar's been high for such a long time, and then they start vomiting and getting sick, it's often mistaken for the flu. And if you do, and they'll say, oh, here's some antibiotics, go home. And what I would say is, like I said, this is only 1% of all people with diabetes. So the chances of your child getting diagnosed with type 1 are very slim, but it's super important to know what the signs and symptoms are. And with any case, if the doctor says, oh, no, it can't be that, and if your gut is telling you something else, there's no harm in asking the doctor to check, or just ask the questions. It's very easy to check. We checked, with a pricking his finger in the doctor's office to try to rule out diabetes. And then, of course, after that, we needed more lab tests and other things, but it can be very, very easily checked. This is where your pancreas is in your body. Like I mentioned, the pancreas is a truly fascinating organ. It does so much for us. I've been a pancreas for 10 years and 2 months, which is 5.4 million minutes, 320 million seconds. I am up every night, several times a night, just to make sure my son's blood sugar is in check, or we have certain, his insulin pump alarms if his blood sugar is too high. And a person with type 1 diabetes, their blood sugar is never perfect, particularly in adolescence, because many things can affect blood sugars, and not just in children with diabetes, but in adults. Hormones can affect it, growth can affect it, coffee can affect it. If we're happy, it affects blood sugar. If we're sad or stressed or thoughtful, or depending on the time of day, if we've exercised, it can affect our blood sugar for up to 24 hours. There are about 50 different known things outside of what's happening in our body biologically that can affect our blood sugars. And diabetes does come with a lot of social challenges, regardless of the type of diabetes that you have. It's very misunderstood. Why it happens is misunderstood. As I shared with you before, people think that I just have an endless amount of work to do because everyone here has diabetes. They don't understand why it happens. They just think that people have an unhealthy lifestyle and they get diabetes. They misunderstand the role of food in diabetes, which I talked a little bit about, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And they misunderstand the seriousness of it. It is for life, and the attitudes of others is really challenging sometimes. People, like I said, people think it's not serious. Other people, we misunderstand it until we get a diagnosis. And I've been accused of being, a helicopter mom or an overbearing mom, because people think, oh, he just has to eat healthy and he's fine. But I wish it was so easy. People often blame the person with diabetes. I've actually sat at a table with a bunch of coaches, and one woman had said, well, they've done this to themselves. I was very quiet, because if there is no response for that. No one ever does any chronic condition to themselves. Sometimes our bodies just need help. Some people blame the parent. In the case of children with diabetes, I was told by a personal trainer before that I must have eaten too many sweets when I was pregnant. That's why my son has this condition. And others, sometimes they do fear that they might get it too. But some people think people with diabetes can't live a normal life, but that's just so not true. And how can you manage it should you get a diabetes diagnosis? There's many things that you can do. If you get a type 1 diagnosis, you do have to manage it with insulin. In the beginning, I won't lie to you, it's very challenging trying to learn everything that you have to learn to take care of a child with diabetes. Plus, you're also grieving the loss of that part of your child's health, and you don't know what it means. You don't know about the future. Will they be safe? Will they be fine? I promise you they will, and you will too. But you can manage it by making healthy food choices, or I should say it's more easily to manage. You won't always have perfection, even with type 2. Exercise and be active every day. We should all be doing this. If you're ever diagnosed with diabetes, as I mentioned, take your medication. Don't just think, oh yeah, my blood sugar is better now, I don't need it. Check your blood sugar regularly. That's super important because we can't manage it if we don't know what we're managing. And get regular checkups, see your endocrinologist on a regular basis, and ask your doctor questions. Ask your doctor as many questions as you need to, because there are a lot of things to discuss with diabetes. And I think doctor appointments are very short. And for doctors, they just know this medical stuff. They're taught in medical school. They may not have thought that you're wondering about how you're going to travel with diabetes or some other question. And of course, now everyone has questions with COVID and diabetes, but whatever your questions are, make sure that you're asking people who are qualified about it, because it brings a lot of questions and your questions should be answered. Don't just, settle for a doctor that says, here's some insulin, some metformin, eat better and exercise. There's a lot more that goes into managing it. Why do we do physical activity? Obviously, we want to be fit, we want to be strong, we want to lose weight. Some of us want to lose weight, and it's fun. And of course, now we're not doing it so much with friends, because of COVID. But at the end of the day, all of that will improve our blood sugar. Eat healthy. I can't stress it enough. Like I said, diabetes or not, nobody needs to be eating donuts every day. We want to avoid drinks with sugar like sodas, and already we know there's tax on those and we don't really see those around as much. But sports drinks, I see kids drinking sport drinks all the time. They have just as much sugar as a cola, and sometimes more because they're bigger. And also juices, we think juices are healthy. Like I'm talking about juice boxes. If it's fresh juice, that's a very healthy choice. Depending on what you're eating it with and how many other carbs you had, there's a lot that can go into a juice. But a juice box, we use juice boxes to treat low blood sugar, and they spike blood sugar very quickly. They have about 22 carbohydrates per juice box for your average size juice box. The organic ones have less sugar because they're a little bit more natural. But 22 carbs, that's half a can of Coca-Cola. So at school parties, we think that we're, let's make it healthy and we'll get some juice boxes, and they can have that because they're eating, a relative amount of junk food, even though we're not having school parties right now. But juice boxes are not always the best snack. I think I would say use those in moderation. Eat the right size portion. Know how much you're eating for meals and snacks. Like I mentioned, now in things that we buy, especially drinks, sometimes we're getting 2 or 2.5 portions in one package. So we're really eating double the amount. And a lot of you may have seen pictures of, fast food, what a meal looked like back in the 1970s or 80s, and then what a fast food meal looks like now, and it's bigger. And then even though it's bigger, you can supersize it. So we're, in one meal taking in what maybe we used to take in all day. That doesn't help us or blood sugars. Don't skip meals. Try to eat 3 meals a day. The reason for that is because it will keep your blood sugars consistent. It will keep them from going too low and too high. Now, a dietitian who I know and trust, and I interviewed her recently in video interviews that I do, she is a fan of intermittent fasting. So if some of you are into fasting, that is one that she is okay with her patients doing. And this is from an expert. This is not me telling you that. I personally don't like fasting, and I have to eat. Otherwise, my blood sugar, actually, I feel it goes low. But you have to find what works for you, and please try to do that with a qualified specialist. eat breakfast, as I said, unless you're fasting and doing it with somebody that's qualified to tell you how to do that properly. But breakfast is so important. And I would say also, especially for children, avoid breakfast cereals. This is already just making their pancreas work too much. Even cereals that claim to be healthy, if you look at their ingredients, sometimes the first ingredient is some kind of sugar, or the second ingredient, you really don't want that. What that does to a person with diabetes is it will spike your blood sugar. If you don't have diabetes, what that is doing is making your pancreas kind of jumpstart and work really hard to digest all of these refined grains and sugars. There's other things that we can, choose for breakfast depending on your culture, if you're a vegetarian, or what you eat. There's many options. And if you do like cereal, I have the most amazing recipe to make your own granola at home. And as an added bonus, it makes your house smell pretty good and it doesn't spike blood sugars. And choose a healthy snack. Always try to push those. I mean, of course, everything in moderation. From time to time, we're all going to eat something that's maybe not healthy. That's okay. But the majority of the time, we want to eat fruits, vegetables, and healthy grains. And we want to drink lots of water. The only thing that we really need to be, drinking is water. And this, again, is coming from people that I know that work in the diabetes space. If you think your child might need electrolytes, then maybe don't get it from a sport drink. There are some drops that you can add to water, and I would say ask their doctor about which ones are safe to use for children. The healthy eating plate, I think we've all seen this before. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but the thing I love about this is half of the plate is vegetables and fruits. I think that is the most important thing that we should consider. And I like the way Canada did it. This really emphasizes the importance of fruits and vegetables in our diet. And as I mentioned, I'm a certified lifestyle medicine coach. And throughout all of our training, the focus is on plant-based eating and scientific evidence around why that is a good thing. Eating a lot of beef and chicken, even though, a lot of people like beef and chicken, we want to eat it in moderation, really. There's a lot of scientific studies that show that it's not really great for us to do that. And also what I find in people with diabetes, because of the way our metabolism works, that in itself is a whole nother presentation. But your body has to break down the protein and fat before you can break down carbohydrates. So if you're having challenges with insulin resistance, you might want to take a look at how much meat and protein that you're eating. And again, ask your doctor about this. But that can make your body work more and have to work harder because we have to metabolize everything else first. So try to eat as many plants as you can. And the majority of our vitamins are coming from a very colorful plate. And of course, now in the times of COVID, when people are talking about, getting enough vitamin C and things like that, getting it from plants and fruits and vegetables, that is a fantastic and one of the best ways we can intake it. But healthy eating is more than just the foods that you eat. We should be mindful of what we eat. We should all be cooking our food. I know it's so convenient on some days when no pun intended, your plate is full and you're working too much and you don't have time and you got to go home and you got to feed your kids. And we all do it. We're like, okay, Deliveroo or Uber Eats or whatever it is. Like I don't know how many apps now, but cooking your foods is one of the most amazing things you can do. And the less processed it is, the better. Think fresh foods, because if you buy something fresh, you have your raw ingredients, and if you're cooking it, you control what goes in your food, not somebody else. And even if you find that you're reading the labels of something that you've ordered, it still might, and you think, you've given your medication correctly and you're exercising, and what might seem like is healthy may not actually be as healthy as you think it is because the amount of fat that's put in it or some of the other additives and different things. We don't really know, what is going on with what we can't see. Celebrate food, share it with others. Of course, maybe not so much during COVID, but food is a real celebration. And I always say that I'm from the US And it wasn't until I moved to this part of the world that I really learned how to eat, because food is much more ceremonial. It's shared more often. It's cooked, more fresh. It's more about the quality and not always about the quantity. Although in the last few years, like I mentioned, with, the apps and the increases in the meals and sizes that we buy and take away and different things like this, that is changing. But I think we should make food a really special occasion. Eat at a table without distraction or devices. Sorry if anyone is watching this webinar right now and you're eating. I do that too. I know we have to eat when we have to eat. Sometimes we got to sneak it in, and it happens. But try to have at least one meal a day where you're not looking at your phone and you're really focusing on your food. You're chewing your food. You know what it smells like. You understand the textures, and just really appreciate it. It's a very different experience than if you're, scrolling your social media feed. Read labels. If the first three ingredients, if you bought, let's say, a can of fruits or vegetables, and the first ingredient on that packaging is not what you are intending to buy, then you might want to look at buying something else. Because often things that are processed or canned or packaged that aren't raw, the first ingredient might be sugar, or it might be something else that you don't even know what it is. And chew your food. It's scientifically proven that if we chew our food well, then that can actually decrease help prevent or help decrease the chances of developing diabetes, because that's the first step of the digestion process. Be aware of how your food is marketed to you. There's a reason food companies make billions of dollars. They are experts at playing on our emotions to market food to us. I have a whole presentation about this subject. I love this subject because it's really fascinating of what extent people go through to get us to buy their foods. And it's always the processed foods. Limit foods that are high in sodium and saturated fats, that also you can find on the labels, and everything in moderation. Get your kids involved as soon as you can. In the kitchen, get them cooking, get them talking to you about what they want for dinner. A lot of people say to me, well, my child doesn't like fruits or vegetables, but maybe, and maybe you've been trying to give it to them all their life, or maybe you didn't. And what I did when my son was smaller, I would put healthy things in front of him and we would eat them at the table and eat it together. And he may not have always wanted to eat it, but then one day, like this little boy here, he was much older, but this guy is adorable. He's eating a yellow pepper. And one day my son reached for a pepper and he just started eating it without me even having to ask. So there are ways that you can nudge healthier foods into their life. But I think kids like to feel like they have a say in the matter. So give them some choices and get them involved. What healthy eating is not. It's not following the latest fad diet or social media craze. It's not taking your friend's advice because that worked for them. We are all so different, just as I have kind of light brown, blonde hair and brown eyes, and somebody else on this call might have blue eyes and dark brown hair. We're all genetically different. Our bodies are different. So what works for one person may not work for another person. Taking medication that your friends or family members' doctors prescribe to them is not suggested. And I've even seen that happen in diabetes. What I suggest, if you're curious about a medication that a friend or family member has been prescribed, go ask your doctor about it. Say, hey, my friend's taking this new type of insulin. Would that be a good insulin for me? Don't deprive yourself. I really believe in not depriving yourself. At the end of the day, there's a lot of different foods out there. There's a lot of different ways to celebrate things. And depriving yourself typically just results in us binging on all the things that we've been depriving ourselves of. So enjoy it. And, if you have a cupcake today, that's okay. Maybe we're not eating cupcakes every day, and we shouldn't. But it's okay to enjoy those quote unquote not so good foods sometimes too. Following trends that you don't enjoy. And again, this goes back to kind of the social media craze. For example, keto, a lot of people do a keto diet. I'm not a vegetarian, but I hate meat, and I'm really not a huge fan of chicken. And I don't care how many people are looking fabulous on a keto diet. I am not going to try it, because then I'll just be eating avocados all the time. And I don't get fit that way. I actually gain weight when I do that. So I'm not going to follow that trend, because I hate meat and I'm not going to torture myself. I want to enjoy food and I want to enjoy my life, and I want to find the eating habits that fit into my personal lifestyle and my personal beliefs. And don't exercise your way out of a bad diet. I know I'm guilty of this. Like, I'll say, oh, I need to exercise for the upcoming food I'm going to cook and eat during Thanksgiving. And while, yes, I will increase my activity, but it is not a lifestyle. That, again, you're not fueling your body with good food if you're trying to exercise your way out of bad food. You're going to crash and burn when you do go exercise. So that is more or less my talk about diabetes. Thank you if you made it through the whole thing and listened to me talk about it. I just want everyone to please remember that if you ever have a diabetes diagnosis or you have diabetes, that there is absolutely no shame in diabetes. I think a lot of the media, the way diabetes is portrayed in images that we are bombarded with, it gives a lot of people shame. A lot of people sometimes feel embarrassed about diabetes. It is not looked at in the same way that other chronic conditions are. And I'm not here to say that this chronic condition is more challenging than another. They're all challenging. All health issues are challenging. But there is absolutely no shame in diabetes. And always remember that there are many successful people who have diabetes. Thank you so much. If you have any questions now, if we have a few minutes, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. You can send me an email. I'll answer any questions anytime, or feel free to follow DiaPoint on social media, or I share more lifestyle medicine tips and things on my coaching site. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions. Thank you so much.